Senator from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would ask consent to carry on a short colloquy here with Senator Merkley, or maybe other senators that join us, and also as much time as I may consume.
Without objection?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Merkley, I've listened very carefully. I mean, you and I have worked diligently, I think, since we got into the Senate to try to make sure that the Senate was functioning properly. And what we really want to see more than anything, I think, is bipartisanship, working together. And so whenever we worked on the rules, I know that one of our principles that was a good one is that draft rules so that they apply whether you're in the majority or the minority. And that's something I think we've done on a regular basis, is try to look at the rules and say, if we do the right set of rules, then if we're in the minority, we'll feel good about them. If we're in the majority, they'll work for us that way also. And so I'm wondering, I see calls of reform all around the Senate right now. You see the presidential candidates that look at our Senate rules and they say they ought to be reformed. There ought to be filibuster reform. You see Republicans over in the House almost every week. They're raising the issue. There should be filibuster reform. We need democracy to work. And then many of the outside scholars, people like Thomas Mann and Norm Ornstein and scholars like that, write books over and over again. And always a big chunk of the reform package goes to the Senate rules. And so I would ask you, do you think we're really talking about there being fertile ground right now for us to come together? That this is a time when enough people are speaking about this that we should be able to come together. And what we're urging, aren't we urging them to join us in some kind of format, on the floor, off the floor, have a meeting with various senators that have worked on this in the past? Is this a good time to do this?
I think you're absolutely accurate that this is the perfect moment to do it. When you and I first engaged in this dialogue, we reached out to our Republican colleagues. We held one-on-one meetings. We sought champions, and what we found was that the view of reform was so polarized by whether you were in the majority or the minority. And you and I said, we are going to have this test for what we put forward. That what we put forward when we're in the majority is what we'll put forward when we're in the minority. If we don't think that it would work for us in the minority, then it's not an honest or fair appraisal of making the Senate work. And so now that we've come to that test, because here we are, we're now in the minority, and we're proposing the same set of ideas. And I still absolutely believe that these ideas would make this place work better. It would enable more bills to be debated, which is to have that value when you're in the minority, to actually put your amendments forward and have that debate as a gift. Certainly, it says that if you really believe, the idea that we put forward on the talking filibuster, if you really believe that you want to block something, you have to stand on this floor and debate it. I still think that that's a way to keep the theory of the filibuster, but return it to the social contract of the past, where people understood this was a simple majority body, as envisioned in the Constitution, as envisioned by Hamilton, as envisioned by Madison, that they'd had the experience and the challenge of the supermajority, knew that that did deep damage, but that if you really believe something so deeply, then you're willing to spend the time and energy. So I think the things that we crafted in the majority still hold up, but the bigger point is this. Now that we have had a reversal, many of our colleagues are experiencing the frustrations that the majority can inflict on the minority, can inflict on the majority firsthand, and I think that opens a window of opportunity. And I have probably a list of 20 quotes. You referred to people in the House, you're a former member of the House, saying to their Senate colleagues, their Senate Republican colleagues, why don't you do something to fix the Senate? And now we're standing here saying, join with us in a dialogue to fix the Senate.
Senator Merkley, I couldn't think of this being a more appropriate time. I think it is fertile ground, and And I think it's great that we've come here. And the important thing, I think, to remember is a point that you and I both made in the past, has to do with the old movie that everybody knows about, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. People always thought the filibuster was like it was portrayed in that movie. You have Mr. Smith coming to Washington, and he's concerned with a passion about an issue, and he thinks that he may be in the minority, but he wants to fight it out. And he comes to the floor and he speaks about it, and he rallies people outside. And now, today, as we know, you don't see that very often. Actually, sometimes what people are even calling filibusters are at the early stage of a motion to proceed before we even get onto the bill. But what we are doing is trying to return to the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. What we want to see happen is a talking filibuster where every senator gets to talk. I mean, that, as you and I know, you've been a real scholar and a student of the Senate in terms of its history. Always the tradition has been, before there was even this rule in place on the filibuster, is that every senator had an opportunity to speak. That was a fine Senate tradition. It was established. They didn't have to write it down. It's just everybody said, we're not going to take any action until we let every senator speak. And the other part of it was just what you talked about in our amendment proposal, is allowing senators to offer amendments. And today we're so far away from that. We have this motion to proceed. We don't even get onto the bill. That causes so much mischief because you have all these procedural things that happen in advance of even getting on the bill. And you know, you were a leader in your legislature, and I want you to just reflect a little on that, because you've seen when you get a bill on the floor, you work on it. You get to amend it. You get to debate it. And most of the time, the people that are working on it, they want to get to the end game. But we're not able to do that. And isn't that been your experience in Oregon and working with your legislature, that if you can get onto the bill, that's about half the work right there. And we are blocked here with this motion to proceed and the filibuster of the motion to proceed.
Indeed, my experience in the Oregon State Legislature was dramatically different. In many ways, it was much more similar to the way I saw the Senate operating when I was here in the 1970s and then working for Congress in the 1980s. But when we got to a bill on the floor of the Oregon House, where I served for 10 years and spent 2 years as Speaker, every moment was utilized in debate. There was no paralysis. People knew we had limited time. We were there to hear each other, to make decisions, and certainly in a more expeditious style than is the custom in the Senate. But what had in common is that the floor time, well utilized in the Senate in the past, well utilized in Oregon. You know, I was thinking about how this all began as you were speaking of kind of the traditions and how the Senate worked. And when we had that first U.S. Senate, they had in their rule book a motion to force a vote. And they had that rule, but they never used it. And why didn't they use it? Well, imagine that there are just 13 states and just 26 senators, and they stand here occupying a quarter of the space that we now occupy, and they say, well, we certainly can extend the courtesy of hearing each person's insight or opinion before we vote. And so after a couple years, when they rewrote the rule book, they decided not to even include the rule. They didn't need it because they had the courtesy of hearing each other. And so suddenly there is a Senate with no rule on how to close debate or force a vote. And over time, that courtesy eroded. And it was after World War I that the first time occurred when the Senate said, well, let's enable a majority, a supermajority of the Senate to close debate if there is too much abuse or paralysis. But the point is that the filibuster is not in the Constitution. And some of my colleagues have said this is the way the founders designed the Senate, to be a supermajority body. That is wrong, wrong, wrong. It's not in the Constitution. It was not in the early Senate, and it was not a major feature of the Senate in terms of it being a common experience until these recent years. So if we can recapture the spirit of the courtesy of hearing each other's opinion, but enable us to get onto a bill, to be able to debate the bill, to be able to do amendments, and then if someone finds a moment of great principle, great heartfelt objection, and wants to spend the time and energy to extend debate, they do so in this visible, as we talked about, the talking filibuster fashion. I think that would be a huge improvement and well worth trying.
And Senator Merkley, the thing that you point out, and it's so important, I think, for people to understand, when we put the original bill back in there in World War I, it was put in so that a minority could not block. And we had Woodrow Wilson as president. He was very concerned. We were talking about national security during a war, and he wanted to arm our merchant ships. And he got a bill out of the House of Representatives, and it was rolling towards the Senate. It was near the end of a session, and he took that bill very seriously. He thought it was vital for the national security of the country, and he asked the Senate to act on it. And there were about 11 senators, I believe, 11 or 12, who had decided, you know, we're near the end of the session, let's just run out the clock. And there was no procedure to be able to get to the bill before the clock was run out. And so these 11 senators took to the floor, they ran out the clock, and Woodrow Wilson said, no way am I going to allow that to happen. He got a bee in his bonnet on that one, and the next Congress that came in, he says, I want a rule so that doesn't happen again, those 11 senators. And so we put in a rule, which was at the time 67 votes in order to cut off debate. And that rule really was turned on its head with what's happening in recent times. I mean, the rule was originally so that a small minority, you could cut off debate and you could proceed to the issue. Now we have calls to the cloakroom, calls to the leadership. You and I don't know what's going on. We don't know why we don't get on an issue. We know on a motion to proceed we have these votes and the motion to invoke cloture and all these procedural things nobody understands. But they say, why can't you get on the bill? Well, because the filibuster rule has been turned on its head. And so that is something that people have to understand, is we are not using this filibuster rule the traditional way that we used it in the Senate for the purpose that it was originally put in. And as you've pointed out on the motion to proceed, and I wanted to ask you one more thing about the motion to proceed. You've talked about how in 1962 we increasingly started to see obstruction in terms of the motion to proceed, and it would prevent bills from getting to the floor. There wasn't any way to get on these bills, so it jammed things up. But I'll never forget the senator who I succeeded, Senator Pete Domenici, solid Republican, believed in the Senate. He came out and said, we shouldn't have filibuster on motion to proceed. We should get on to the bill. I remember several senators that came in our class and after, Republican senators, said the same thing. And so I think there's a lot of room here between, and I'm asking you again in terms of the motion to proceed and us calling for a bipartisan effort, we should be able, with the people that are here, to either work on the motion to proceed, work on the talking filibuster, or work on a variety of other amendment issues that are crucial. Don't you think this is the time? And so I just want to make sure before you leave that we make sure that there's an invitation from us to 98 other senators to sit down in some format, whether it's a bipartisan conference or something, and talk about how we make this place work better and how we make it more democratic.
You know, there are two members of the Senate, former members of the Senate right now, who are working on a book to come out in January in which they will be addressing reform of the Senate. And that's Trent Lott and Tom Daschle. And they have already issued a number of ideas about how to reform this place. But the point I'm making is that when people leave the Senate and they reflect back, they say, you know, there's a bipartisan opportunity, a bipartisan responsibility to make this chamber work. What we're saying is that this can't be accomplished through folks who have left the Senate, that we must, in bipartisanship here, solve it ourselves, that any rule changes that are envisioned, any agreements that are forged have to be done here on this floor, and that we are extending that invitation, as you put it, to our 98 colleagues to be part of that dialogue. We can draw on the ideas that our former members have put forward as a starting point. We can draw on the ideas that you and I have put forward. But these ideas, there's no one way to address this. We're inviting others to brainstorm together in a dialogue to try to gather a vision that perhaps we can commit ourselves to in a bipartisan fashion to enact at the start of the next legislature, when we realize we may not be minority or majority, and that becomes a magical way to escape our current status. Here, as we are embattled and we're having deep emotional fights over foreign policy and social policy and how to create jobs in America, but to get some distance on that and say how to make this chamber work the way it was envisioned. Because certainly, I think 100 members could agree that the Senate today is broken. Wouldn't it be phenomenal if in a bipartisan effort, we were able to restore the U.S. Senate to being a great deliberative body?
Senator Merkley, you're absolutely right, and I'm just going to close by saying that the thing that we have, and I said this in the beginning, the thing that we have worked on and tried to achieve is to make sure that when we crafted changes to the rules, motion to proceed, talking filibuster, how we allow each side to have the amendments, we have always said we could live with them if we were in the minority. And we've been in the minority now for almost a year, a couple of months, and it'll be a year. And we came out right at the beginning of the Congress and talked about our rules again. We've proposed the same rules in the majority. We want to be fair to both sides, but the more important thing isn't that fairness, it's the fairness to the American people to get their democracy back again so it works. And so with that, I would ask consent to insert my statement in the record as if spoken, and I don't know whether to, and with that, I would yield the floor and we have, I see Senator Booker and Senator Cory Gardner and Senator others here, so I'm going to just yield the floor.